Okay, hello. So we're ready to go. We'll be starting in less than a minute. Got a few people tuned in. Okay, we'll start. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. So, what we're going to talk about today is right view and its opposition to wrong view, samaditi and michiditi. First of all, let's clarify the meaning of ditti. Ditti is translated as view, and that's a good translation. It works because the word view in English has a double connotation, and so does the word ditti in Pali. A view can be the object of eye consciousness, like when you look out the window, you take in the view, or it can be the way you understand things, like a mental construction, a mental framework, let's say. This is also, ditti is used in both senses in the Pali. Here, of course, we're looking at the sense of a mental framework. Uh, Ditti is not exactly the same thing as an opinion or a belief. It's more what underlies our opinions and beliefs. It's like the underlying substructure of our mental framework, how we understand the world. It's close to the German word used in philosophy, Weltanschauung, worldview. And everybody inevitably has some kind of ditti. You can't really function without it. You have to make sense of the world in some way, and so you'll have actually several ditties, relating to different ways you understand the world, the kind of underlying frame of on which we construct our thoughts, our opinions, our philosophies. So it's a very basic kind of uh, frame of understanding, let's say. And samaditi, right view, is the very first factor in the Eightfold Path. It's a foundation on which everything else uh, is built. Without a foundation in right view, none of the rest is going to be done properly. It's always going to be misaligned. You could say that ditti has that function of aligning the mind. So it's important that we uh, understand right view and make an effort to hold right view. It's always important to emphasize it's not the same thing as having a set of beliefs that one must hold. It's not like uh, a doctrinal catechism. It's rather it's a framework by which we understand the world, and it's defined in different places with different content. There's a definition that comes up several times in the Pali that is generally called conventional right view because it doesn't touch on the transcendental teachings. It is entirely dealing with our understanding of samsara. And there's a long formula, but it boils down to a belief in karma and rebirth. And I think this is quite uh, proper, for the this is the kind of the lower level of right view, to have a framework that sees reality in terms of cause and effect, and that's karma, and also in terms of multiple lifetimes. If one does not have a view of multiple lifetimes, then the events and decisions and actions in this lifetime are affected. We don't uh, we, we don't think or act in the same way if we believe this is the one and only lifetime. There would be no, for example, there would be no motivation to really strive for awakening or enlightenment because it's all uh, it all comes, we all come to the same place at the end and just uh, are disintegrated. So what's the point of spending the one and only lifetime seeking enlightenment? Um, it does give a quite different sense and flavor once you really internalize the view of multiple lifetimes. And you can see this difference in attitude in Buddhist countries where this is like in the air. Is everyone believes in karma and rebirth. It's not really even considered as something that's open to debate. It's just that's the way it is, and this gives a different feel to the culture than it does than in our increasingly secular Western countries where most people are materialist. So that's one definition of right view, and it's often called the conventional right view because it's limited to the samsaric um, uh, level. It doesn't touch on anything higher or deeper. Then there's a definition of right view that is given in terms of the Four Noble Truths, and this is the definition that's actually given in the uh, expansion of the Four Noble of the Eightfold Path in the Dhammacakka Sutta, and that is to believe in dukkha, the cause of dukkha, the ending of dukkha, and the path leading to the ending of dukkha. So it's kind of a self-referential loop there because the path, of course, includes right view. But this does have the transcendental aspect included because of the third truth, which is nirvana, release from samsara. You could also define right view as the three characteristics, understanding things in terms of the three characteristics, that is emptiness, impermanence, and dukkha, suffering or unsatisfactory or imperfect, however you choose to translate it. Um, and this is the aspect of right view that's, I think, most useful for uh, formal development in meditation, in vipassana meditation. To this view naturally develops when you look at individual mind moments and you see the three characteristics. That's when you're making progress. And the last one I'll mention is right view based on the dependent origination. Not so much in the extended formula, although you could include that, but just in the general principle of dependent origination, which is a simple statement of causality, that nothing arises without a cause. And then there's an expansion to that, is nothing arises from a single cause. So it's this is one I'd like to focus on because I think it's the underlying linchpin of all Buddhist thought and philosophy subsequent, that the taking the stand on causality is crucial. It denies any possibility of randomness or arbitrariness in the universe. Things occur because of cause and effect, and not otherwise. And that includes, but not is not limited to, karma and result of karma. And understood properly, it also leads to the understanding of emptiness, because if things only arise as a result of other things, then nothing exists from its own side. Nothing is a self-sustaining, self-sufficient entity. And then this is one way of understanding emptiness. Everything is just a reflection of other things, which are themselves reflection of things ad infinitum. So, taking this stand on causality as axiomatic is a way of understanding all of Buddhist thought. Is a good starting point, let's say, to expand out from. And now let's consider the negative. Let's consider wrong view, Michuditi. In the Digha Nikaya, the first sutta of the Digha Nikaya, the Brahmajala Sutta, details 62 types of wrong view. And many people reading this take it as a kind of artificial matrix of analyzing possible wrong views. And it does have some aspect of that, but it's a very interesting book by a Sri Lankan Buddhist scholar, Jan Taleki. Early Buddhist Theory of Knowledge is the title. And a good portion of that book is devoted to an analysis of the Brahmajala Sutta and the 62 views. And he identifies many of them with existing philosophies or schools of thought in India. So the Buddha was, and this is not out of character from what we know of the Buddha's other teachings, that he was a very practical and very much a man of his time, and speaking to an intelligent, literate Indian audience at the time, he would have addressed the particular philosophies that people knew about. He wasn't just making up possible philosophies, but actually dealing with real schools of thought. So it's quite a complex sutta, quite a long list, and each one is detailed. But it actually boils down can be simplified to two principal types of wrong view, which include all these other variations, and one sort of oddity that's off on the side. The two types of wrong view, and in other shorter suttas, it is simplified to this formula. These are the two what are called extreme views, and they are Sasatawada and Uchedawada, the eternalist view and the annihilationist view. Ucheda literally means cutting off. And these had their adherents in ancient India, and we see that they still are predominant in the world today. Most people outside of Buddhists who understand the Buddhist system properly, outside of Buddhism, then uh, everyone who professes some kind of a philosophic view of the world falls into one of these two camps, Uchedawada and Sasatawada. The Sasatawada are the eternalists. Uh, they hold, in the ancient Indian context, the commonest form of this was the belief in an eternal Atman. Atman is or was conceived to be a component of a human being that is eternal and unchanging and passes from life to life. And in the Bhagavad Gita, a great deal of the Bhagavad Gita is devoted to talking about the Atman. And one of the metaphors used is it's like a man going to bed at night, getting undressed and going to bed, and then in the morning he gets up and put his clothes back on. It's like when you a person dying and being reborn. It's like putting on a new set of clothes. But the man is like the Atman, doesn't change and continues on. So that it's no coincidence that the Buddha's teaching on emptiness, he generally refer to it as anatta, not self, because atta is the Pali version of the Sanskrit Atman. So again, he was working and teaching in an Indian context and using concepts that Indian people would understand. But this creationist view usually goes along, almost always goes along with the idea of a singular creator God. It's part of the system of eternalist view and having an eternal, omnipotent creator God. So this was held by some in India, and obviously it's a simplified formula that lies behind many of the great religions of today, or the monotheistic religions. There's a belief in a creator God and eternally existing souls. The other extreme view is the Uchedavada view, the cutting off view. And this was a minority position in India, I would say, in ancient India, but there were still many who held it. The idea that the only thing that's real is materiality, and as it's expressed in the sutta, the Uchedavada holds that when a person dies, the earth element returns to the earth, the water element returns to water, the air element to air, the fire to fire. And when the body is consumed on the funeral pyre, there's nothing that remains and nothing that continues. So this is a materialist view, and obviously it has many adherents in the world today. Sometimes it's referred to in philosophical parlance today as physicalism. The idea that nothing exists except matter and matter in motion. The modern iteration of this would be that mind or consciousness is nothing more than the result of electrochemical reactions in the brain. It's a reductionist view in that the idea that psychology can be reduced to biology, biology to chemistry, and chemistry to physics, and there's nothing that cannot be explained at that level. So we have these two extreme views, and the Buddha cited his view as being based on the dependent origination as being in the middle. This is one of the uses of the term middle path. that the middle path or middle way is the middle between the two extreme views, and it takes a stand on dependent origination. Now, in the world, and particularly today, even more so, I would think that in ancient India, the two extreme views appear to be, particularly today, even more so, I would think that in ancient India, the two extreme views appear to be irreconcilable enemies, and in many ways they are. And, um, a lot of the philosophic debate at present is between religious believers and materialists. And you have creationism versus evolutionism, for example, which I discussed a bit last week. But they seem to be complete and utter opposites, and in many ways they are. But from the Buddhist point of view, they both share one fundamental error, one fundamental failing that causes them to fall apart as philosophies, and that is that the law of cause and effect, the law of causality, breaks down in these systems at some point. In the eternalist view, it fails on the point of arbitrariness, that um, you can explain things only so far, and then you have to fall back on, well, that's the way God did it, and God's way is arbitrary. It can't be explained by humans, and God is given as the first cause. So he isn't. So though they may have a system of cause and effect, it breaks down at the root, in that there has to be in such a system a first cause. The first cause being in theistic systems being God. And of course, God himself is not subject to cause and effect, but has an arbitrary will that causes the creation of things. The materialist view fails on the ground of randomness, that there is no explanation for. There can be in mechanistic science, there can be detailed explanations of how things work, but not why they happen. You know? This is evident in the case of human beings and the varied states of rebirth. That some human beings are born male, some are born female, some are born healthy, some are born sickly, some are born with more intelligence or less, so on. There's variations in how humans are born, and some have extreme births. On the positive side, they might be child prodigies, geniuses. On the negative side, you might have someone born with a gross deformity or like Down syndrome or something, some unfortunate birth. And the mechanism of this, biological science can, to a large degree, explain in terms of genetics, and how something went wrong with the chromosomes or something went wrong in the womb. But it it doesn't address the question of why this person was born as a genius child prodigy, and this one was born mentally retarded. There's no rhyme or reason to it, and to a materialist thinker, it seemed like a valid question, but it's a very human, real question. Why this and not that? Uh, and it's no good just falling back on randomness, because then you're basically saying, well, we don't know. Also, on a more general note, Indeed does consciousness arise? This is a um, extreme mystery to materialist science, and it's admitted to be so. They call it the hard problem in understanding brain functioning. The materialist believes, without any evidence, I would say, but he believes strongly that consciousness must arise from the processes in the brain somehow. But no one's come close to even suggesting a theoretical way in which that might be possible. And as I've mentioned before, I don't believe it is possible because consciousness is not algorithmic. Consciousness is not a stepwise process. It just occurs. It is. You just know. You have experience, and it can't be broken down into some kind of a algorithmic function. So it cannot be mechanistic. And the problem is especially acute in the first moment of consciousness, when a being first comes into existence. In the case of a human birth in the womb, where did that consciousness come from? The eternalist has an answer. He says that God put it there. The soul is created by God. The materialist or mechanistic thinker has no explanation. He can't explain why consciousness suddenly arises. Sometimes you see an attempt at an explanation by saying that when a system becomes sufficiently complex, it may become self-referential and consciousness arises. But this is really a kind of magical thinking, because it's not an explanation of any kind. They can't replicate it. They can't detail it. It's a form of superstition, really. So, again, we see no cause and effect here. The chain of causality breaks down. So the Buddhist view, based on dependent origination, it doesn't have these problems. Consciousness arises because of previous consciousness. So the first consciousness in a new life continuum must be reborn into that entity from a previous lifetime. And there's no break in the chain of cause and effect. One of the implications of this is that the universe and consciousness is without beginning. It's beginningless. The Buddha refused to express a definite statement on this when he was asked. He said it's one of the Abhikatadhammas, one of the unanswerable questions. But it follows logically, and it was very much accepted by the later tradition and explicitly stated by Buddhaghosa that samsara is without beginning. It follows logically from cause and effect, because if there was a first moment, that would have to be either uncaused or caused by something that itself was uncaused. So that another way of phrasing it would be to say that however far back in time you go to moment X, then if you examine moment X, it has to have had previous causes. So there has to be a moment X minus one. And you can carry that on ad infinitum. Sometimes people have a hard time wrapping their heads around the idea of backwards infinity in time. And somehow they find it easier to grasp forward infinity in time. But it's really just a mirror image of one or the other. If you can, and failure to grasp it is not anything more than a failure of imagination. It's not any kind of philosophical answer to that. So some of you who are maybe keener on the uptake may have noticed that I really, much earlier in the talk, I mentioned that there was a odd man out in the system. There's in the 62 wrong views, they all fall into either eternalism or annihilationism. But there is one category that has, I forget whether it's like two or three or four variations. It's a small number of variations. It is called the eel wriggler's view. That's a literal translation from the Pali, the eel wriggler. Uh, it's because the person who holds this view wriggles like an eel when he's asked a question. And there's a bit of, I think, intentional humor in the sutta that quoting someone who holds this view as some yogi who holds this view when he's asked about um, asked a question about the nature of being or the state of a being after death or something. One of these philosophic questions. He wriggles like an eel and says, "Well, if I said it was so, then maybe it is, and maybe it's not, and who knows, and this and that." It goes on and on. It's just kind of rambling without answering the question. Um, so this and this view is treated quite derisively in the commentary. It's stated that people who hold this view for one of two reasons: cowardice or stupidity. So it was quite looked at quite derisively, and this is very similar to what modern people would call agnosticism, the, the not knowing. And the extreme form of agnosticism is you can't know, and there's no use even asking the question. Um, some of you may be familiar with. There's I think a quite brilliant little book by a Canadian author. It's a novel, and they've actually made a movie out of it. It's called Life of Pi, and by Jan Martel, and it's a very philosophically deep book. And one of the subplots in the book is this young Indian boy who is quite fascinated by all these different religions, and he loves aspects of Hinduism and Islam and Christianity, and he goes to all these services. He sees no contradiction. He loves them all. And then when he grows old, and then there's a section later in the book when he grows older, he goes off to university and he starts to meet atheists for the first time. And he starts to become fascinated by the atheist way of thinking as well. And then there's kind of a throwaway paragraph where he says, it's all written kind of the first person. There's a throwaway paragraph where he says, there is only one religious position that I encountered that I could never relate to, and that is agnosticism. He said that when an atheist comes to die, and if he sees the great white light, he'll say, "Oh, I was wrong. There is something else." And if an agnostic sees the great white light, he'll say, "Oh, I wonder what that is. Maybe it's my brain firing, or maybe it's a pathway to heaven, or maybe it's the headlight of a car out the window. Who knows what it is?" He'd die without ever understanding anything. So that's just kind of an aside. It's not the main theme that I want to talk about. I want to leave you with one last image. This is something I come across in a short essay by Maurice Walsh, who you may be familiar with as the translator of the Digha Nikaya. An essay that he wrote about right and wrong view, and talking about much of what I'm talking about today. And he had a really nice little image there. He said that there's an optical illusion if you have a round lake with an island in the middle. From either side of the lake, you look at that island, it appears to be closer to the far shore. And this is the case with the two extreme views and the middle path of Buddhism. If someone standing on the north side of the lake, let's say they're the eternalists, and they look at Buddhism, they see it as being, well, they don't believe in God, they don't believe in eternal soul. They're just basically materialists with a little bit of hocus pocus added. There's very little difference, and this is actually basically the critique that theologically sophisticated Christians make of Buddhism. Then, if you go around the lake to the south side and you stand with the materialists, then the Buddhist island looks like it's close to the far shore, and they say, "Oh, the Buddhists think there's something special, but they believe in rebirth, and they have other realms, and they're all this weird mystical stuff. They're really just another religious variant of the religious people on that far side." So, the proper or the Buddhist way of understanding it, standing on the island, is that this is the middle. This is the view that takes that all aspects into account. It doesn't deny any aspect of reality. It takes it all into account and takes its stand on causality. So I'll stop there, and hopefully, like last week, the stream cut off without warning me before I answered the questions, and I ended up just talking into the wind for 10 minutes. So we'll see if hopefully it stays on this time. So I'll start here with this first question. Are the five faculties the way that Buddha taught how to practice in a balanced way? And what about the five strengths? Yes, that's exactly it. The five faculties are all about finding balance, and the five strengths are the same, just when they're in a perfected state. We call them strengths or bala. Question: the sutras talk about understanding the danger, gratification, and scope of the five faculties and five strengths. What does it mean? Well, it's to do with the balancing, that there is like the two faculties of samadhi and virya, concentration and energy, that really relate to very directly to meditation. Um, they have to be developed pairwise. They have to be, and the danger is if you've got too much of one, you're overdeveloped in one and the other is weak, then your meditation will go off. If you have too much samadhi and not enough virya, then you become dull and sleepy. If you have too much virya and not enough samadhi, you become restless. But when they're completely balanced, then it's fine. Then that's when you make progress. Next one: what should a lay Buddhist without a sangha do every day or in general to be a good Buddhist? Does drinking alcohol-free beer mean breaking sila? Well, question 2 first is simple. If it's alcohol-free, you're not breaking sila. It's just like drinking soda pop. What should a lay Buddhist do every day? I would say the key things are keep the precepts, keep a good ethical base, and do some meditation practice every day. And that's kind of the bare minimum that you're going to then be making progress. What if someone argued that the mind is just an inherent part of matter or quantum field like waves in an ocean? How would the Buddhists argue against that, as there is no break in causality here? Well, they would have to explain how that mechanism works, and nobody has. It's not good enough to just have a vague explanation based on complexity or on quantum entanglement or anything else. The mechanism is never elaborated because there isn't one. Mind is it's not mind is not itself free of the law of cause and effect. It's causal as well, but it follows its own laws. It's not part of matter. Why does Brahmajala Sutta say annihilation is most correct of the wrong views? Um, I don't remember it saying that, but I could see that. Uh, I'm not saying you're wrong. I just don't remember seeing that, but I could see some sense in that statement, in that annihilationism uh, at least has a sense of the idea of impermanence, and also follows cause and effect further, I think, than the eternalist view. If you dedicate merit to get psychic powers in this lifetime, will it happen? No, that's not how it works. It's not dedicating merit. Is not is benefit is to benefit the departed. It's not to give you psychic powers. Uh, if you really want to develop psychic powers, you need to be a master of jhana to begin with. Can you describe the change in view that is experienced by the Sotapanna? Okay, that's a good question, because Sotapanna is uh, one definition, let's say, of Sotapanna is that it's a purification of view. And um, the three fetters that are broken by the Sotapanna all have some relation to the view. There's the Sakaya Ditti, the personality view. So the streamliner no longer views the world through the lens of a belief in an abiding or substantial self. It becomes an impossible idea, because the Sotapanna has glimpsed nibbana, so that changes everything. And it makes it no longer possible to believe in substantiality. So the view is changed directly and immediately, and false view cannot be built. Sotapanna cannot fall into false view. It's not possible for a Sotapanna to hold either annihilationism or creationism. Okay, next one. Is staying jobless and single as a layman unwholesome? Uh, well, it depends what you're doing with your life. If you're just kind of being lazy and bumming around, you're not making any progress. Um, and if you are going to be a layman, my feeling is you should try and be as good and productive a layman as you can. What's the point of life? Just idling it away is not productive. In your opinion, is there any view worth clinging to? No, not. And this is important. That the Buddha said that not even his own teaching you should cling to it. Not to hold it as a dogma. Um, but what you have to understand is that it's impossible to really have no view. You're always going to be viewing the world in some way or another. So uh, you might as well try and align it with the middle path understanding, if you want to make progress. Does having wrong view create bad karma? It's said, it is said to be, because it's a mental action that has bad, karmic effect, but it also can lead to uh, bad actions in the world. And this is, I think, particularly the materialist or annihilationist view, because if you don't believe there's any consequence of your actions, and uh, if you can commit a crime without you're quite sure you'll never be caught, if you don't believe in karmic consequences, um, there's no logical reason why you wouldn't do it. At least in the eternalist view, they often have going along with it some idea of divine justice. So they have a kind of a karma in their system. Can you explain why noble truths number 4 comes after number 3? Sumeda's explanation, it sounds like right view, etc., a result of cessation, pure consciousness, nirodha, etc. I think it's simpler than that. I think as I mentioned a couple of times, that the Buddha was teaching in a specific cultural context, and he often used forms that were known to his listeners, structures, then he gave a new meaning to. And the structure of the Four Noble Truths, some scholars have identified it as coming from Vedic medical texts. The Vedic medical texts will have, each disease will be described in 4 sections. There'll be the first section is the symptoms. Second is a description of the cause of the disease. Third is a prognosis, what we can expect. This person is going to die for sure, or with treatment, this person will get better. And the fourth, and usually the longest section, is the treatment of the disease. So the Buddha is saying that existence in samsara is like a disease, and here's the symptom is dukkha. The cause is the desire. The prognosis is liberation. It can be ended. There is a way out. And the fourth is the treatment, the Four Noble Truths. Next one. So, wrong view is a misunderstanding on the role that consciousness plays in experience, resulting in the viewing ability of consciousness being distorted. Yeah, that would be one way of describing it. It causes us to see things incorrectly. Isn't Buddhism also a reductionist philosophy, since all things are broken down into the 5 aggregates? Well, it is in that sense, if you put it that way. It is, particularly if you get into Abhidhamma, there's an attempt to explain things in terms on a fundamental level. But it doesn't. It's not reductionist in the same sense, and it doesn't reduce everything to one factor. Like if a materialist view would not have 5 aggregates; it would only have the one, because the aggregate of materiality only. Since the Buddhist cosmology doesn't match with the globe Earth picture, what place do you think can we fit in beliefs about rebirth and the Buddhist cosmology? Well, I think it's really possible that there are other realms of existence that we have in the Buddhist cosmological system. We have description of the Deva and Brahma worlds and above, and the ghost and hell worlds below. And in the classic vision, they have a physical geographical arrangement that we can no longer really support, but it doesn't negate the possibility of those realms existing. And we don't know everything. We don't know everything about the universe and about different possibilities. There's a lot we don't know about the universe, and there might be some plane of reality that we don't see or can't detect with our instruments, where something like Mount Sunaru actually exists. I wouldn't rule that out. I'm not saying necessarily that's so, but I think there's no reason to that modern scientific understanding needs to negate the overall idea of different realms of existence. Is it true that one only realizes right view when one attains sotapanna? Well, one only attains perfect right view when one attains sotapanna. One can before sotapanna, you try to align your view, but it's only the Sotapanna, because he's glimpsed Nibbana, who can have a perfect right view. Prior to that, there's no way of understanding Nibbana with the intellect or grasping it prior to direct realization. So the view can never be perfect then. Question: some wrong livelihoods are trading with meat and intoxicants, is working in a supermarket that sells both, or in a restaurant that deals with both, having a wrong livelihood? Yeah, that's a kind of a touchy question. And I know that with the way the economy is around the world, if you have an opportunity to work in a restaurant, it's hard to pass it up. And I don't think it's really what's meant by it. Certainly with the it would not there wouldn't be any problem with selling meat, because the definition is selling animals for slaughter. So